The man they laughed at owned every brick beneath their feet. The revolving glass doors spun slowly as a black man in a faded gray maintenance uniform stepped into the lobby of Walker Properties. Rainwater clung to the shoulders of his jacket. A worn toolbox hung from one hand. The building around him rose 41 stories into the cloudy Chicago sky, its polished marble floors reflecting rows of crystal lights overhead. Executives hurried past, carrying leather portfolios and steaming cups of coffee. None of them looked twice at him. None of them noticed the calm expression behind his tired eyes. The security desk sat beneath a massive silver logo mounted on the wall. Walker Properties. The name stretched nearly 12 feet wide, illuminated by soft white light. The guard glanced up from his monitor and frowned. "Maintenance entrance is around back," he said without looking carefully. The man nodded politely. "I'm here to check an issue upstairs." The guard let out a short laugh. Nobody checks anything upstairs without authorization. Around them, people moved through the lobby in expensive suits worth more than most monthly mortgages. Several executives glanced toward the maintenance worker and quickly looked away. One woman tightened her grip on her designer handbag as she passed. Another man shook his head impatiently. To them, he was invisible. Just another worker. Just another face. The maintenance worker smiled faintly. "I understand." His voice remained calm, measured, patient. He stepped aside and walked toward a row of elevators. Above him, hidden behind layers of glass and steel, a very different conversation was taking place. On the 41st floor, a long mahogany conference table stretched across a boardroom overlooking the city. Rain streaked the windows. Gray clouds rolled above the skyline. Margaret Whitfield sat at the head of the table, her silver bracelet catching the light as she folded her hands. Around her sat 7 board members. Crystal glasses rested beside stacks of confidential documents. A bottle of champagne waited on a side table. The atmosphere felt less like a business meeting and more like a celebration. "By this afternoon," Margaret said with a smile, "everything changes." Several members exchanged knowing looks. One man loosened his tie. Another leaned back comfortably in his chair. "And Walker?" someone asked. Margaret's smile widened. "He won't know what happened until it's already done." Soft laughter circled the room. Downstairs, the maintenance worker stepped into a service corridor lined with steel doors and humming electrical panels. The sounds of the busy lobby faded behind him. He moved quietly through the building he knew better than anyone alive. Every hallway, every office, every floor. 22 years earlier, he had stood on an empty lot holding blueprints in his hands and a dream in his heart. There had been no tower, no marble, no boardroom, just determination. Now strangers sat in offices he had built from nothing. As he entered a freight elevator, he looked at his reflection in the brushed steel walls. The gray uniform, the toolbox, the scuffed work boots. Nobody would recognize Isaiah Walker today. That was exactly the point. The elevator door slid shut. The numbers began climbing. Somewhere above him, people were preparing to take control of his company. What none of them realized was that the man they believed was absent had already entered the building. And before the day was over, everything they thought was secure would begin to fall apart. The freight elevator climbed slowly through the heart of the tower. Floor 12, Floor 16, Floor 21. Isaiah Walker stood motionless, one hand resting on the handle of his worn toolbox while the soft mechanical hum echoed through the metal cabin. The reflection staring back at him from the brushed steel wall looked older than the man who had first dreamed of building Walker Properties. A few silver hairs lined his temples now. Fine creases framed his eyes. Yet the determination remained exactly the same. 22 years earlier, Isaiah had not started with investors or inherited wealth. He had started with a folding table, a second-hand laptop, and a tiny office above a neighborhood grocery store on the south side of Chicago. Back then, banks had rejected his proposals. Developers had dismissed him. Some executives smiled politely during meetings before throwing his plans aside the moment he left the room. They did not believe a young black entrepreneur could build something that would survive in an industry controlled by powerful families and old connections. Isaiah remembered every closed door, every delayed loan, every meeting where people looked past him and spoke to someone else in the room. Instead of giving up, he worked longer hours. He studied contracts late into the night. He drove hundreds of miles each week searching for properties nobody wanted. When others saw abandoned buildings, Isaiah saw opportunity. When others saw struggling neighborhoods, he saw families who deserved investment instead of neglect. One project became three became 10. Within a decade, Walker Properties had transformed entire communities. New apartment complexes rose where empty lots once stood. Local businesses returned. Families found affordable homes near schools and parks. The company grew into one of the largest real estate firms in the Midwest. Yet success brought new faces into the organization. New executives, new board members, new advisors. Many of them arrived after the hardest years were already over. The elevator doors opened quietly on the 29th floor. Isaiah stepped into a corridor lined with glass offices. Employees moved between desks while computer screens glowed beneath rows of modern lights. Nobody recognized him. A young analyst hurried past carrying a stack of reports. A receptionist spoke softly into a headset. Two managers stood near a conference room discussing quarterly projections. Isaiah listened without drawing attention. Most conversations sounded normal. Revenue forecasts, leasing numbers, development schedules. But as he continued walking, he noticed something else. Employees seemed nervous. Conversations stopped when certain executives appeared. Smiles disappeared. Doors closed quickly. The atmosphere felt different from the company culture he had spent years creating. Near the end of the hallway, he spotted a familiar face. Noah Carter, 27 years old, junior analyst. Isaiah remembered reading Noah's file. Several months earlier. Bright, honest, promising. At that moment, Noah sat alone staring at a spreadsheet on his monitor. His shoulders looked tense. His coffee had gone cold. A thick folder rested beside his keyboard. Before Isaiah could continue, two senior executives entered the department. Their expensive shoes clicked against the polished floor. Noah immediately straightened in his chair. One executive placed a hand on the folder. "You have not submitted this report yet?" he asked. Noah hesitated. "I still have questions about the numbers." The executive's expression hardened. That was not a request. Isaiah remained silent from across the room. His eyes narrowed slightly. The executives walked away moments later, but Noah did not return to work. Instead, he stared at the folder as if it contained something he wished he had never discovered. Then, very carefully, he slipped a yellow sticky note onto the cover. From where Isaiah stood, only 3 handwritten words were visible. "Do not trust Margaret." For the first time that morning, a chill moved through him. Whatever was happening inside Walker Properties was larger than office politics. And somewhere above, on the 41st floor, the people responsible were preparing for a vote that could change everything. The yellow sticky note remained in Isaiah's mind long after he left the 29th floor. "Do not trust Margaret." 3 simple words. 3 words written by a young analyst who looked more worried than ambitious. Isaiah continued through the building carrying his toolbox, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged everywhere and nowhere at the same time. The company around him continued its daily rhythm. Phones rang. Printers hummed. Elevator doors opened and closed. Yet beneath the polished surface, something felt wrong. He could feel it in the hurried conversations that stopped when supervisors approached. He could see it in the nervous glances employees exchanged across conference rooms. Walker Properties had once been built on transparency. Today it felt like a building full of locked doors. On the 41st floor, the atmosphere could not have been more different. The boardroom overlooked nearly 30 miles of skyline. Rain slid down the floor-to-ceiling windows while Margaret Whitfield stood beside a digital presentation screen. Her posture was relaxed, confident. She looked less like a corporate executive and more like someone already celebrating victory. Charts and financial projections glowed across the screen behind her. "The acquisition partners are ready," she announced. "The paperwork is complete. All we need is today's vote." Several board members nodded approvingly. Charles Bennett adjusted his cufflinks and smiled. "After months of preparation, we are finally here." Edward Lawson leaned forward. "And there will be no resistance?" Margaret's expression barely changed. "None that matters." Soft laughter drifted around the table. Meanwhile, several floors below, Isaiah entered a small employee cafeteria. The lunchtime crowd had begun to gather. Workers sat with sandwiches, salads, and coffee while television screens displayed financial news. Isaiah purchased a bottle of water and took a seat near the back corner. From there he could observe without being noticed. 2 property managers occupied a nearby table. Their conversation immediately caught his attention. Did you hear about Lakewood Gardens? One asked quietly. The other nodded. Everyone has. Isaiah's focus sharpened. Lakewood Gardens was one of the company's largest affordable housing communities. Nearly 2,000 residents lived there. Families, retirees, teachers, nurses. Many had lived there for years. I heard the sale paperwork is already done, the first manager whispered. 3,000 units. The second manager shook his head. Those people have no idea what is coming. Isaiah felt his grip tighten around the water bottle. What do you mean? Asked the first manager. The new owners plan to convert everything into luxury housing. A long silence followed. That cannot be legal. Maybe not, the second manager replied. But it is profitable. The conversation ended as another employee approached their table. Isaiah sat perfectly still. His pulse slowed instead of rising. Whenever challenges appeared, he became calmer, more focused. 22. Years of business had taught him that emotion clouded judgment. Facts revealed truth, and facts were beginning to emerge. As he left the cafeteria, his phone vibrated once inside his pocket. It was not a public device. Very few people possessed the number. Isaiah glanced at the screen. A secure message had arrived from the company's chief legal officer. Only 5 words appeared. We need to talk immediately. Isaiah stopped walking. The legal officer had worked beside him for nearly 15 years. She never sent vague messages. Never. Something serious had happened. Above him, on the 41st floor, board members were reviewing final documents. Below them, hidden inside the company he had built, pieces of a much larger puzzle were falling into place. And for the first time that day, Isaiah began to suspect that the threat facing Walker Properties was far bigger than a simple power grab. The message stayed on Isaiah's screen for several seconds. We need to talk immediately. 5 words. Nothing more. Nothing less. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and continued walking through the building. His pace remained steady, but his attention sharpened. Over the years, he had learned an important lesson. People rarely revealed the truth during official meetings. The truth surfaced in hallways, elevators, break rooms, and private conversations people believed nobody important would ever hear. The afternoon crowd was growing busier. Employees moved between departments carrying folders and laptops. Outside the windows, rain continued to fall over Chicago, turning the skyline into a blur of steel and silver. Isaiah entered a service elevator and pressed the button for the 37th floor. As the doors closed, he replayed everything he had seen so far. Nervous employees, strange financial reports, affordable housing developments being quietly sold, a warning about Margaret, and now an urgent message from legal counsel. None of it felt random. The elevator opened onto a quieter floor occupied mostly by senior executives. Thick carpets softened every footstep. Glass walls framed spacious offices overlooking the city. Isaiah moved through the corridor carrying his toolbox, appearing invisible once again. Near the end of the hallway, voices drifted from a partially open conference room door. He slowed. Inside sat Charles Bennett and Edward Lawson. Neither noticed him. Their attention remained fixed on a collection of documents spread across the table. The vote is already secured, Charles said. Even if questions come up later, it will not matter. Edward nodded. And the founder? Charles laughed quietly. He has been gone for months. The company runs itself now. Isaiah remained perfectly still. The investors only care about appearances, Charles continued. Let us be honest. He was useful during the growth years. The story, the image, the publicity. Edward smiled. People love a success story. Charles leaned back in his chair. Exactly. But sentiment does not run a corporation. Numbers do. A few seconds passed before Edward lowered his voice. Margaret believes this changes everything. Charles looked toward the rain-covered windows. It does. Once today's deal closes, nobody can stop us. Isaiah felt no anger, only clarity. Every word confirmed what he had begun to suspect. They did not see him as the architect of the company. They saw him as a symbol they could remove once they believed his usefulness had ended. The conversation shifted toward financial projections. Isaiah quietly moved away before attracting attention. Several minutes later, he reached a small records office near the end of the corridor. The door stood slightly open. Inside, rows of storage cabinets lined the walls. A young administrative assistant sat alone reviewing digital files. Her expression looked worried. She glanced around before slipping a document into a secure envelope. Then she froze. Footsteps approached from the hallway. Margaret Whitfield entered the room. The assistant immediately stood. Margaret's smile looked pleasant on the surface, but her eyes remained cold. "Is everything ready?" she asked. "Yes," the assistant replied. Margaret extended her hand. "Good. Give me the original copy." The assistant hesitated, just for a second, but Isaiah noticed it. Margaret noticed it too. "Is there a problem?" Margaret asked softly. "No, ma'am." The envelope changed hands. Margaret turned and walked away. Once she disappeared down the hallway, the assistant slowly sat back down. Her hands trembled. Isaiah watched from a distance. Whatever had been inside that envelope clearly mattered. And for the second time that day, he saw fear in the eyes of someone who worked for him. A few moments later, his phone vibrated again. This time the message contained an address. Conference room 38C. Come alone. The sender was the chief legal officer. Isaiah looked toward the upper floors where the board's vote was drawing closer. Then he turned toward the stairwell. Whatever answers he was searching for were finally within reach. Conference room 38C sat at the far end of a quiet corridor rarely used by regular employees. The lights were dimmer here. The carpet muted every footstep. Through the windows, Chicago stretched beneath a curtain of rain and low gray clouds. Isaiah pushed open the door and stepped inside. The room was empty except for one woman seated near the far end of the table. Olivia Grant, chief legal officer of Walker Properties. For nearly 15 years, she had been one of the few executives Isaiah trusted completely. Her sharp attention to detail had protected the company through acquisitions, lawsuits, and economic downturns. Yet today she looked different. Tired. Concerned. A thick folder rested in front of her. She stood as soon as she saw him. "I was beginning to think you would not come." Isaiah closed the door quietly behind him. "Your message suggested urgency." Olivia glanced toward the hallway before sliding the folder across the table. "It is worse than urgency." Isaiah opened it. The first page showed property transfer agreements. The second revealed investor commitments. The third contained projected revenue increases tied to redevelopment plans. His eyes moved steadily through each document. The deeper he read, the colder the truth became. Entire neighborhoods were scheduled for sale. Affordable housing communities. Senior living properties. Workforce housing developments. Projects Walker Properties had built specifically to provide stable homes for working families. The numbers were staggering. Thousands of residents could be affected. Isaiah lifted his eyes. "How much of this has been approved?" Olivia hesitated. "More than you think." The room fell silent except for the soft tapping of rain against the glass. "Margaret?" Isaiah asked. Olivia nodded. "She has support from most of the board." Isaiah turned another page. Several signatures appeared at the bottom. Charles Bennett, Edward Lawson, 3 other board members. The approvals stretched across multiple months. Carefully coordinated. Quietly executed. Why was I never informed? Olivia looked down. Because they made certain you would not be. Isaiah remained calm, but his attention sharpened further. Olivia reached into the folder and removed a smaller document sealed inside a transparent sleeve. "There is more." Isaiah examined the paper. It was not a sale agreement. It was a board resolution, a formal proposal. His eyes moved to the headline, Emergency Executive Restructuring. For the first time that afternoon, he felt genuine surprise. The resolution outlined a plan to permanently remove him from operational authority. Not publicly, not immediately, quietly, through procedural votes and governance changes. His ownership position would remain intact, but his ability to influence decisions would effectively disappear. Olivia folded her hands. "The vote happens today." Isaiah stared at the document. Everything suddenly aligned. The secrecy, the rushed approvals, the nervous employees, the hidden conversations. They were not simply selling properties. They were dismantling the company he had spent decades building and ensuring he could not stop them. "How many people know?" he asked. "Very few." Olivia's voice lowered. "Most employees believe this is a standard strategic review." Isaiah walked toward the window. 40 stories below, cars crawled through rain-soaked streets. Somewhere among those buildings stood families living inside communities now being treated like numbers on a spreadsheet. Communities he had promised to protect. Behind him, Olivia spoke again. "There is something else you need to see." She opened her laptop and pulled up a confidential communication chain. Dozens of emails appeared on the screen. Isaiah scanned them quickly. Then he stopped. His eyes narrowed. Buried among the messages was a name he never expected to find connected to the scheme. A trusted executive. Someone who had stood beside him through the company's most important years. Someone whose loyalty he had never questioned. The room suddenly felt smaller. Olivia looked at him carefully. "I am sorry." Isaiah said nothing. Outside, thunder rolled across the city. Upstairs, the board's final vote was less than an hour away. And now he knew the threat was not only coming from the people he distrusted. It was coming from someone he had once considered family. The name on the screen refused to leave Isaiah's mind. He stared at it for several seconds without speaking. Rain continued to slide down the glass behind him, turning the city into a watercolor of gray towers and blurred lights. Olivia remained silent. She understood what the discovery meant. Some betrayals came from opponents. Those were easy to understand. The difficult ones came from people whose loyalty had once felt unquestionable. Isaiah slowly closed the laptop. His reflection appeared faintly in the dark screen. Older now, wiser perhaps, but in that moment, he felt something deeper than disappointment. He felt the weight of time. 22 years of trust. 22 years of building relationships. 22 years of believing certain people shared the same values. Outside the conference room, employees continued moving through the hallways, unaware of the storm gathering above them. Isaiah stepped toward the window. 40 stories below, traffic lights reflected across wet pavement. Pedestrians hurried beneath umbrellas. Delivery trucks crawled through intersections. Life continued as normal. Yet somewhere in those neighborhoods stood thousands of families whose futures were being discussed inside boardrooms by people who would never know their names. A young teacher living in one of the company's affordable apartments. A retired couple on a fixed income. A single mother balancing 2 jobs while raising children. Numbers on a spreadsheet for some people. Human beings for Isaiah. His hand rested lightly against the cool glass. Memories returned unexpectedly. He remembered the first apartment complex Walker Properties had ever renovated. The building had been condemned before his team stepped in. Most investors wanted it demolished. Isaiah had walked through the empty hallways himself. Broken windows, damaged walls, leaking pipes. Everyone saw a loss. He saw possibility. 1 year later, families moved into safe homes with affordable rent. Children played in a courtyard that had once been covered in debris. Elderly residents sat on benches beneath newly planted trees. That project had shaped everything that followed. It was never just about real estate. It was about people. Behind him, Olivia finally spoke. "What are you going to do?" Isaiah remained quiet for several moments. Then he looked down at the maintenance uniform he still wore. The faded fabric. The worn boots. The simple name patch sewn onto the chest. Not one person in the building had recognized him all day. Not security. Not executives. Not board members. For a moment, the realization almost made him smile. They had spent months plotting against the founder of the company without ever learning to recognize the man himself. "I needed to see it with my own eyes," Isaiah said softly. Olivia nodded. "And now?" Isaiah turned toward her. His expression had changed. The uncertainty was gone. In its place stood calm determination. "Now I understand." A low rumble of thunder rolled across the city. Olivia glanced at her watch. "The vote begins in 30 minutes. Isaiah walked toward the conference table where the folders remained spread across the polished surface. Sale agreements, financial projections, internal communications, governance changes, years of work reduced to paper. He studied each document one final time, not with anger, with precision. Every detail mattered now. Every signature, every approval, every hidden conversation. The truth was finally visible. His phone vibrated again. A notification appeared from the executive floor. Board members were already gathering. Final attendance confirmed. Isaiah slipped the phone into his pocket and picked up his toolbox. Olivia watched him. Carefully. "You look surprisingly calm." Isaiah glanced toward the rain-covered skyline one last time. "Because this stopped being about me hours ago." He opened the door and stepped into the hallway. Somewhere above, people believed victory was only minutes away. They were preparing speeches, celebrating outcomes, congratulating themselves. None of them realized the quiet man they had ignored all day was finally on his way upstairs. The 41st floor felt different from the rest of the building. The air seemed heavier, quieter, more certain of itself. Board members sat around the long mahogany table while rain tapped softly against the towering windows behind them. Crystal glasses reflected the gray afternoon light. Digital screens displayed financial summaries, acquisition schedules, and voting procedures. Everything appeared orderly, professional, final. Margaret Whitfield sat at the head of the table with the confidence of someone who believed every variable had already been controlled. Charles Bennett reviewed a stack of documents beside her. Edward Lawson checked messages on his tablet. Around them, the remaining board members exchanged relaxed smiles and low conversations. The atmosphere felt less like a meeting and more like the final moments before a celebration. "We should begin," Margaret announced. Chairs shifted. Tablets lit up. Pens clicked against polished wood. The board secretary prepared the official voting record. Nobody noticed the service elevator doors opening at the far end of the executive corridor. Isaiah stepped out carrying the same worn toolbox. The maintenance uniform remained unchanged. The same faded gray fabric. The same scuffed boots. The same appearance everyone had ignored throughout the day. He moved calmly toward the boardroom. Halfway there, a security supervisor noticed him. "Excuse me, sir." Isaiah stopped. The supervisor approached quickly. "This floor is restricted." Isaiah offered a polite nod. "I know." The supervisor pointed toward the elevator. "Maintenance requests must be scheduled through facilities management." Before Isaiah could answer, another voice joined the conversation. "What is going on?" Margaret had emerged from the boardroom. Several members followed behind her. The moment she saw the maintenance uniform, irritation crossed her face. "Why is he up here?" she asked. The supervisor immediately straightened. "I was handling it." Margaret folded her arms. "Then handle it faster. We have important business to conduct." Several board members watched from the doorway. Some smiled. Others barely concealed their annoyance. To them, the interruption was insignificant. Just another employee in the wrong place. Charles Bennett stepped forward. "Sir, this area is reserved for executive personnel." Isaiah remained calm. "I only need a few minutes." A brief laugh escaped Charles. "A few minutes?" He shook his head. "You do not understand. Decisions are being made in there that affect billions of dollars." Several board members chuckled softly. Isaiah noticed how easily they dismissed people they considered beneath them. Not with open hostility. Something quieter. More familiar. The assumption that certain voices mattered and others did not. Margaret glanced at her watch. "Please remove him." The supervisor nodded and stepped closer. Before he could speak again, another elevator opened at the opposite end of the corridor. Every head turned. 3 people stepped out. Olivia Grant, the company's outside counsel, and a representative from the Independent Compliance Review Committee. Their arrival immediately changed the atmosphere. Margaret's smile faded slightly. "Olivia," she said carefully, "I was not expecting you." Olivia walked forward without hesitation. "I know." Silence spread through the hallway. The compliance representative carried a thick black case. The outside counsel held several folders. Neither looked interested in small talk. Charles exchanged a quick glance with Edward. For the first time all afternoon, uncertainty appeared inside the boardroom. Margaret recovered quickly. "Whatever this is can wait until after the vote." Olivia stopped beside Isaiah. "Actually," she said, her voice calm and precise, "the vote cannot proceed." The hallway became completely silent. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Somewhere below, the city continued moving through. It's ordinary afternoon. Up here, everything had stopped. Margaret's eyes narrowed. "And why exactly is that?" Olivia looked toward Isaiah. Not at the maintenance uniform. Not at the toolbox. At the man himself. Then she answered with 7 words that drained the color from several faces at once. "Because the founder is already here." The silence that followed felt almost unreal. No one moved. No one spoke. Rain traced slow paths down the glass walls while the words hung in the air. "Because the founder is already here." Margaret Whitfield stared at Isaiah as though she were seeing him for the first time. The maintenance uniform suddenly looked different. The worn toolbox. The quiet confidence. The calm expression that had never changed despite every dismissal and every insult throughout the day. One by one, the faces around the boardroom shifted from irritation to confusion. Then confusion became recognition. Charles Bennett's smile disappeared first. Edward Lawson slowly lowered his tablet. Even the security supervisor stepped backward. Isaiah did not rush to speak. He simply stood there, allowing the truth to settle over the room. Olivia stepped forward and placed several folders on the conference table. The sound echoed sharply through the silence. Before any vote proceeds, she said, the board must address multiple compliance violations and undisclosed transactions. Margaret recovered enough to straighten her posture. This is highly irregular. Olivia met her gaze without hesitation. The transactions themselves are highly irregular. The outside counsel opened a folder and distributed copies around the table. Board members immediately began reading. Several pages in, expressions changed. Signatures, approval chains, internal communications, property transfer agreements, financial arrangements tied to redevelopment projects. Every document had been verified, every date confirmed, every approval documented. Isaiah walked into the boardroom for the first time that afternoon. The same room where his future had been discussed without him. The same room where people had laughed about replacing him. He placed the toolbox beside a chair and calmly removed a small electronic drive from his pocket. There is more, he said. His voice remained steady, controlled. The drive connected to the presentation system. Moments later, the main screen illuminated. Email chains appeared first, then recorded meeting summaries, internal memos, timelines. The evidence unfolded piece by piece. Nobody interrupted. Nobody could. Every question seemed to answer itself before it was asked. The room grew quieter with every slide. Then a new document appeared. The emergency restructuring plan. Several board members immediately looked toward Margaret. Others looked toward Charles and Edward. No one appeared eager to make eye contact anymore. Isaiah finally spoke again. For months, employees have been pressured to approve transactions they did not understand. Affordable housing communities were targeted for sale. Internal oversight was bypassed. Information was withheld from shareholders, and an attempt was made to remove executive authority without proper disclosure. His words contained no anger. Somehow that made them more powerful. Margaret folded her hands tightly. You are exaggerating. Isaiah nodded once. Then let us continue. Another document appeared on the screen. Then another. Then another. Every claim supported. Every timeline verified. Across the table, several board members looked increasingly uncomfortable. Some had approved documents without fully understanding their implications. Others had simply followed leadership without asking questions. The confidence that had filled the room less than an hour earlier was gone, replaced by uncertainty, reflection, regret. Then Olivia revealed the final communication chain, the one containing the name that had shocked Isaiah earlier. The trusted executive, the person he had believed stood firmly on the side of integrity. A low murmur spread through the room. The betrayal was now visible to everyone. Isaiah looked at the screen, then toward the faces around the table. 22 years of work, 22 years of trust, reduced to a series of decisions made behind closed doors. Yet even now, he felt no desire for revenge, only responsibility. Outside, the rain finally began to ease. A thin line of sunlight appeared between the clouds. Inside the boardroom, nobody noticed. Their attention remained fixed on the evidence displayed before them. And as the final document appeared on the screen, several members suddenly realized something that sent a chill through the room. The investigation had not started today. Isaiah had been gathering information for much longer than any of them imagined. The boardroom remained silent long after the final document disappeared from the screen. No one argued anymore. No one reached for excuses. The evidence had spoken for itself. Rain no longer tapped against the glass. Outside, the clouds were beginning to break apart, allowing strips of afternoon sunlight to spill across the city below. The room that had felt untouchable only hours earlier now felt very small. Margaret Whitfield sat motionless at the head of the table. The confidence that had carried her through the day was gone. Charles Bennett stared down at the papers in front of him. Edward Lawson leaned back in his chair, saying nothing. Around them, board members exchanged uneasy glances, finally understanding how far things had gone. Isaiah stood near the window, looking not at the people in the room, but at the city beyond it. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Olivia placed a final document on the table. It was short, simple, official, a resolution removing every board member involved in the unauthorized transactions and governance violations. The independent review committee had already approved it. External auditors had signed off. The decision was final. One by one, Signatures appeared on the page. Not with celebration. Not with anger. Just accountability. The process took less than 10 minutes. 22 years of work had nearly been undone. 10 minutes restored its direction. When it was finished, Isaiah finally turned back toward the room. Several people expected a speech. Others expected condemnation. Instead, he spoke quietly. Walker Properties was never built for board members. It was never built for headlines. It was built for families who needed someone to believe their neighborhoods mattered. Nobody interrupted. The moment we forget the people behind the numbers, we stop deserving the responsibility we have been given. His voice remained calm. The same calm voice that had carried him through every challenge since the beginning. Margaret lowered her eyes. Charles said nothing. Even those who had merely followed along without asking questions seemed unable to meet his gaze. Yet Isaiah did not insult them. He did not seek revenge. The lesson was already visible. Actions had consequences. Integrity mattered. The meeting ended quietly. No dramatic exits. No raised voices. Just people leaving the room with the weight of their choices resting heavily on their shoulders. An hour later, employees throughout the building began receiving official announcements. Leadership changes. Governance reforms. Internal reviews. Most workers did not know the full story. They only knew something important had happened. The atmosphere felt lighter almost immediately. On the 29th floor, Noah Carter stared at the company-wide memo appearing on his screen. His eyes widened. For the first time in weeks, he smiled. The yellow sticky note he had written earlier still sat beside his keyboard. Do not trust Margaret. Slowly, he peeled it away and dropped it into a recycling bin. The warning was no longer needed. The next morning, sunlight filled the lobby where the day had begun. Employees moved through the entrance carrying coffee and briefcases. Conversations sounded different now. More relaxed. More hopeful. Near the security desk, maintenance staff prepared for another ordinary day. The same silver company logo reflected the morning light. Walker Properties. A young employee entering for work paused when he noticed a familiar man walking through the lobby. No maintenance uniform this time. Just a dark suit and a quiet smile. Isaiah Walker nodded politely as he passed. Some employees recognized him immediately. Others did not. It did not matter. He stopped briefly near the front windows and looked outside. Across the street, a bus pulled away from the curb. People hurried toward work. Life moved forward. The city kept breathing. For a few seconds, Isaiah simply stood there, watching sunlight reflect across the glass. Then, he turned and walked deeper into the building he had built from nothing. Behind him, the lobby settled into its normal rhythm. Ahead of him waited another day of work. And in the quiet that followed, the lesson remained clear. Power can build a company, but character is what keeps it standing.